The less you control, the more you are. Now that sounds at first like one of those charming pieces of nonsense which wise men are supposed to utter, in order to keep everyone else respectfully confused. Because surely you think, if I do not control my life, my thoughts, my circumstances, my future, then what becomes of me? Do I not simply fall apart? Do I not become weak? Passive, careless, at the mercy of accident and chaos? And yet I should like you to consider something very simple. When you fall asleep, do you do it by will? Do you command yourself into dreams as a general commands an army into battle? No. You prepare for sleep, perhaps. You lie down close, the curtains dim the lights, but the actual moment of sleep arrives only when your effort to sleep has subsided. If you try too hard to sleep, you remain awake, staring into the darkness, saying, I must, I must, I must. And that very insistence is what keeps you from the thing you seek. So already in one of the most ordinary and intimate movements of life, we find the strange truth. The desired state comes only when control relaxes. The same is true of love. You cannot force affection. You cannot compel sincerity. The more anxiously you attempt to secure someone's devotion, the more you turn yourself into a strategist, a negotiator, a merchant of emotions. And then love is gone because love is not a contract. It is a happening. It is like fragrance from a flower. The flower does not strain to produce its perfume. It simply blooms and the scent is there. And so we begin to see that much of what is most precious in life appears only when grasping ceases. But we have been taught the opposite. From our earliest days, we are told that life is something to be mastered, managed, disciplined, conquered. We are taught to think of ourselves as captains at the helm of a ship steering through dangerous waters, forever vigilant, forever planning. We imagine that if only we could tighten our grip sufficiently on events, on people, on ourselves, then everything would at last be secure. But have you ever noticed what happens when you grip water? The tighter the fist, the less you hold. Open the hand and the water rests there. You see, control has a place in the practical affairs of life. One does, of course, tie one's shoelaces, catch the right train, remember the appointment, mend the roof before the rain comes in. That is not the issue. The difficulty begins when we extend this useful instrument of control into regions where it does not belong, into the heart, into the mind, into the basic experience of being alive. Then control becomes not intelligence, but interference. You try to control your thoughts, and they multiply. You try to control your emotions, and they deepen their roots in secret. You try to control your future, and you become consumed by anxiety. You try to control how others see you, and you lose all sense of who is doing the seeing. And this, I think, is one of the great comedies of human life. The self we imagine to be in command is itself a kind of mirage. Who is this I that is supposedly controlling everything? If you sit quietly and watch your own mind for a few moments, you will notice thoughts arising as clouds arise in the sky. One thought says I should be calmer. Another says I ought to be better than I am. Another worries about tomorrow. Another rehearses an old embarrassment, polishing it like a stone in the pocket. And all the while there is the assumption that somewhere behind these thoughts there is a little manager, a little monarch issuing orders. But can you find him? Can you locate the thinker? Apart from the thought, can you separate the dancer from the dance? It is rather as if one were to draw a line on the surface of the ocean and say, this wave is independent. This wave is making itself happen. Nonsense. The wave is something the ocean is doing. And you are something the universe is doing, not merely in a poetic sense, in the most literal sense. Just as a tree apples the earth peoples, you did not enter this world like a stranger arriving from somewhere else. You arose from it as naturally as a blossom, from a branch or a flame from a fire. Your body is this world temporarily in human form. Your thoughts are not private possessions manufactured in a sealed chamber called the skull. They are ripples of the total process of language memory, culture, sunlight, food stars, breath, and all the infinite relationships that make you what you are. So then, what exactly are you controlling? And from where? The ego. That image of oneself as a separate, isolated center of command is forever busy defending its borders. It says, I must hold myself together. I must manage the impression I make. I must shape the future. I must not let life get out of hand. But life is out of hand from the beginning, because it was never in your hand to start with. That sounds alarming. Only so long as you think you are something apart from life. If you imagine yourself to be a small creature clinging to a rock in the middle of a vast, indifferent universe, then of course letting go is terrifying. But if you begin to feel, not merely think, but feel that you are this whole process in motion, then letting go is not a loss of power. It is a return to reality. It is what happens when the clenched fist discovers it was always the hand. Now this fear of letting go is deeply bound up. With our fear of uncertainty, we want guarantees. We want maps of the future. We want to know that our efforts will be rewarded, that our relationships will endure, that our bodies will remain obedient, that our plans will not be overturned by the wildness of existence. But suppose for a moment that uncertainty is not the enemy. Suppose uncertainty is the very texture of life. Listen to music. A melody lives by movement, by not staying put. If every note were fixed forever, there would be no song. The beauty is in the passing. The meaning is in the vanishing. A note is precious because it disappears. And you are like that too. A living being is not a statue. You are not something fixed which must be preserved at all costs. You are a pattern, a rhythm, a flowing event. To demand absolute control over life is to demand that music hold a single note and call it a symphony. But life will not do that, nor should it, because what you are most deeply is not the rigid structure you defend. It is the movement itself, the breathing, the changing, the dancing between order and surprise, between knowing and mystery, between form and emptiness. This is why the less you control, the more you are, because when control loosens, the artificial tightness of the ego loosens with it, and then something altogether different begins to appear. Not the anxious, fabricated self-image, but the living fact of your existence. The vividness of being here. The simple, undeniable aliveness of this moment. Before you have named it, judged it, or tried to improve it. There is a curious kind of innocence in this. Not childishness, not ignorance, but freedom from the constant effort to stand outside life and supervise it. Have you ever watched a cat sitting in a windowsill? It is wholly present. It is not trying to make the moment more cat-like. It is not consulting an image of the ideal feline. It is simply there, alert, effortless, complete. And there is something marvelous in that completeness. The cat has not split itself into observer and observed, controller and controlled. It is one piece, whereas the human being, with his splendidly complicated brain, is forever trying to jump over his own shadow. He not only suffers, but he worries about suffering. He not only feels afraid, but he feels afraid of fear. He not only thinks, but he tries to think about how to stop thinking. And so he gets tied in knots. Chunk 2. Now the knot, you see, is not made by thought itself. Thought is a magnificent tool. With it we build bridges, compose poems, cook dinners, tell stories, navigate the stars. The knot is made when thought turns back upon life and attempts to contain what cannot be contained. It is like trying to catch your breath in your hands. The moment you do that, breathing becomes awkward. You become self-conscious. What was once spontaneous now feels mechanical, difficult, unnatural. And many people live their entire lives in this state, trying to breathe existence as if it were a technique to be mastered. How shall I be peaceful? How shall I be secure? How shall I rid myself of fear? How shall I become fully myself? And all the while, the very effort to answer these questions, from the standpoint of control, prevents the answer from being seen, because the answer is not in domination. It is in participation. Look at a dancer. If the dancer is calculating every movement, checking every gesture against an ideal image, worrying constantly whether he appears graceful, he becomes stiff, artificial. But if he abandons himself to the rhythm, if he ceases to stand apart and monitor the dance, then suddenly there is grace. And that grace is not something he manufactures. It arrives when he gets out of his own way. This is profoundly important, for the human being has a strange habit of imagining that authenticity is something to be achieved by effort, as if one could strain to be natural. But can you practice spontaneity? Can you rehearse sincerity? The moment you try to be genuine, you are acting. The moment you try not to be self-conscious, you are self-conscious about being self-conscious. And then one begins to suspect that perhaps the whole enterprise is absurd. Perhaps the self that is trying to perfect itself is rather like a dog chasing its own tail, energetic, sincere, and fundamentally confused. So what happens if instead of joining the chase, you stop? Not as a method, not as a trick to become enlightened, peaceful, admired, or safe, but simply stop. Observe the strange machinery of control. Without trying to improve it, notice how the mind rushes to fix, to label, to anticipate, to hold on. Watch how it says, "This feeling should not be here," or "This moment must not be wasted," or "I must make something of myself." See it as you might watch a monkey darting about in the branches. Clever, restless, incessantly active. And in that seeing there begins a space, a vast space, because the controller depends on unconsciousness. It thrives when its activity is taken for granted, when its frantic movement is mistaken for necessity. But once it is clearly seen, once its tricks are illuminated, something in you relaxes. You do not have to kill the ego, suppress it, or wage war against it. That would merely be the ego pretending to commit suicide. No. You simply see through it. Like seeing through a rainbow. The rainbow is there, and yet there is nothing to grasp. So also the ego. It is a useful social convention. A name, a role, a memory pattern. A way of navigating the world. Perfectly serviceable. But it is not your deepest identity. It is not the source of life. It is a surface arrangement, a game of lines drawn on water. And when this becomes clear, not merely as an idea, but as an experience, you no longer feel obliged to defend the image of yourself so desperately. You no longer need to control every impression, every outcome, every fluctuation of emotion. There is a kind of humor in it. One begins to smile at one's own seriousness. After all, what are you trying so hard to preserve? A reputation, an opinion, a story about who you have been and ought to become. These are shadows. Necessary shadows, perhaps. Useful shadows, but shadows all the same. Meanwhile, life is happening now. In the sound of rain on the roof, in the taste of tea, in the rise and fall of breath, in the sorrow that visits uninvited, in the laughter that erupts before you know. It is coming in the face of a stranger, in the silence between thoughts. And this life does not ask for control. It asks for attention. This is why people so often miss the present. They are not absent because they are evil or foolish, but because they are hypnotized by the belief that reality lies somewhere else, in the next achievement, the next certainty, the next improvement, the next resolution of all unresolved things. They think of life as a journey to a destination, not realizing that the point of music is not to arrive at the final note. When you listen to a symphony, you do not say, "What a pity." It ended. The ending is not a failure of the piece. It belongs to the piece. In exactly the same way, uncertainty, change, even death belong to life. They do not cancel its beauty. They create it. And here we touch something delicate. Something people often prefer not to look at. Our urge to control is inseparable from our fear of death. We cling because we know somewhere in the bones that everything slips away. Youth fades, lovers depart. Children grow and vanish into their own worlds. Health falters, memories blur. The body returns at last to the earth from which it came. And because we sense this, we try to establish permanence through control. We build identities, systems, routines, monuments, conclusions. We tell ourselves that if we can just manage things properly, life will not disappear. But of course, it does disappear, or rather, its forms disappear. The wave subsides, but the ocean remains. And if you identify only with the particular wave, with this body, this biography, this mask you wear in the social drama, then death is indeed the final insult, the collapse of all control. But if you begin to see that you are not merely the wave, but the whole watery process expressing itself as this wave, then death changes its meaning. It is no longer an alien catastrophe imposed upon life. It is one of life's own gestures. This does not mean you must like it. It does not mean you will not grieve, tremble, or feel the ache of impermanence. It means only that the ache itself is holy. That fragility is not a flaw in the design, but the very condition that makes tenderness possible. Would love mean anything if nothing could be lost? Would a sunset move you? If the sky were always frozen in gold? Would a song pierce the heart if it never faded into silence? No. It is precisely because things cannot be held that they become luminous. So there is a profound reversal here. The mind says, control will protect me from loss. Reality says, your attempt to control is what prevents you from truly living what is here. Because the person obsessed with preserving life never actually tastes it. He is too busy storing it, measuring it, defending it, naming it. He photographs the meal instead of eating it. He explains the kiss instead of surrendering to it. He plans the walk instead of feeling the ground beneath his feet. And then one day he wonders where life has gone. But life was never elsewhere. It was hidden only by the effort to possess it. Chunk 3. So what would it mean to live without this chronic tension of control? Not recklessness, not drift, not indifference. It would mean living as one breathes, when one is not thinking about breathing. It would mean trusting the intelligence of the organism, the intelligence of the moment, the intelligence that beats your heart without consulting your opinion, and grows your hair without requiring your supervision. It would mean discovering that there is at the center of your being, or perhaps not at the center, but everywhere a wisdom far older than the chatter in your skull. This wisdom does not speak in commandments. It moves, it responds, it knows how the plant bends toward light, how the hand reaches out when another weeps, how the body rests when tired, how laughter comes, how tears come, how silence comes. It is not a moral lecture. It is a living current. And most of our trouble begins when we distrust it. We have become suspicious of spontaneity because we imagine that without constant control, we would become monstrous, lazy, chaotic. Yet much of what is monstrous in human life comes precisely from over-control, suppressed desires turning poisonous, rigid identities, becoming cruel fear masquerading as order systems of domination, erected in the name of safety. A person who has never learned to let go becomes hard, and hardness is brittle. It shatters. The tree that cannot bend in the wind is the tree that breaks. The reed survives because it yields. This is not weakness. It is intelligence. It is harmony with the nature of things. And so in your own life, notice where you are stiff. Notice where you are forever bracing against disappointment, against vulnerability, against surprise, against sorrow, against joy even. For many people are just as frightened of joy as of pain because joy is uncontrollable. It sweeps you away. It dissolves your carefully guarded seriousness. It reminds you that life is not a ledger to be balanced, but a mystery to be lived. And the same is true of love. To love at all is to relinquish control. The moment you truly love someone, you become vulnerable. Their happiness matters to you. Their absence can wound you. Their freedom can frighten you. And so there is always the temptation to replace love with management, to possess, to define, to secure, to make certain. But then love dies in the cage built to protect it. Love breathes freedom. It has to, because love is not the seizure of another being. It is the recognition that the other is like you, an expression of the infinite and therefore cannot be owned. The more you try to bind it, the less of it remains. The more you allow it to move, to change, to surprise, the more alive it becomes. This is why the less you control, the more you are. You are not a thing to be armored. You are a happening. A flame is not protected by freezing it. A river is not preserved by damming every current. A human life is not fulfilled by reducing it to the manageable, the predictable, the safe. Safety has its place, but beyond a certain point, safety becomes a coffin with excellent upholstery. And now perhaps you begin to see why so many people feel strangely empty, even when their lives appear successful. They have built admirable structures of control, careers, schedules, identities, assurances, and yet they feel divorced from the pulse of existence. They have become curators of themselves. They administer their lives beautifully, but they do not inhabit them. They know what they should feel. They know what they ought to do. They know how they are supposed to appear, but they do not know the taste of simple being. That is why silence can be so revealing. Sit quietly for a while without occupation, without entertainment, without trying to get anywhere inwardly. And at first you may feel restless, even panicked. Why? Because without distraction, the machinery of control becomes audible. The little internal voice begins fluttering like a trapped bird. It says, "This is going nowhere. We should be doing something. We should be improving. We should be deciding." And if you do not obey it, if you simply remain, then gradually the dust settles. And beneath the noise, there is something astonishingly ordinary and utterly miraculous. This, just this, the hum in the room, the pressure of the chair, the breath coming and going, the whole universe arriving as this moment, and you realize that existence was never asking you to control it. It was inviting you to participate in it. To be the listening, not merely the commentator. To be the dance, not merely the critic standing at the edge of the floor. Then life takes on another quality. Altogether, time loosens its tyranny. You still remember the past and plan for the future, but they no longer swallow the present whole. The ego becomes lighter, more transparent, like clothing you can wear, without mistaking it for skin. Fear may still arise. Grief may still visit pain, may still come as they must, but they no longer define the whole sky. They become weather moving through the vastness of what you are. And what are you? Not a separate fragment cast into a foreign world. You are this world, looking at itself through a pair of human eyes. You are the cosmos, playing at being a person for a little while. And when you no longer insist on controlling the play, you can at last enjoy it. You can laugh when the script goes askew. You can weep when the scene turns tragic. You can marvel at the improbable beauty of having appeared at all. For what a strange gift this is to awaken one day as a conscious ripple in the endless sea. To see colours, to hear birds, to touch another hand, to wonder who and what one is. Must this gift be managed into meaning, or is it meaningful already? Perhaps awakening is not the acquisition of some rare and superior state. Perhaps it is simply the collapse of the futile effort to stand outside life and possess it. Perhaps it is the discovery that what you have been seeking is precisely what remains when seeking relaxes. Then there is nothing to hold, nothing to prove, nothing to become, only this endless shimmering suchness taking the form of you, of me, of stars of rain, of silence, of birth and death, and all the in-between. And so when you feel the old habit returning, that contraction, that need to guarantee, to dominate, to make certain pause for a moment, not to scold yourself, not to fix the impulse, merely pause, feel the breath, Listen, notice that the earth is still carrying you. The heart is still beating. The mystery is still unfolding without your supervision. Let life happen, not because you are helpless, but because you are not separate from what is happening. The less you control, the more you are. And when at last you understand this, not as a phrase, but as the felt truth of your own existence, there comes a quietness beyond relief, a kind of gentle laughter, as if the whole universe had been playing hide and seek with itself. Through your eyes, and suddenly the game is recognized. Then you need not clutch so tightly. You may live as the sky lives, allowing clouds to pass. You may live as music lives, vanishing into each note. You may live as the river lives, moving, yielding, shining, unafraid of the sea. And in that yielding, you do not disappear. You appear